The guard at the postern put out one white glove and stopped me in the sleet. 3 paces short of a door I had walked through 10,000 times before I was old enough to shave. "Name," he said. It was 1:20 in the morning. I had crossed a sea and 2 counties in a coat that was wrong for the weather, carrying a canvas bag with 3 days of clothes in it and nothing else worth mentioning. There was ice in my collar. There was a taste in my mouth that I have never been able to describe to anyone, which is the taste of coming back to a place you swore you had finished with, because your mother has died and the world does not care what you swore. "You know my name," I said. "I do, sir." He did not lower the glove. "Say it, please." I have thought about that glove more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. It was not raised in insult. It was not raised in triumph, or in that small, nasty pleasure that a certain kind of man takes in making a bigger man wait. It was simply raised, level with my chest, the way a lamp is held level, and behind it stood a sergeant of the household guard in a greatcoat gone black with sleet, and behind him stood the palace, and behind the palace, somewhere in the dark and the gold, lay the body of the Queen Mother of Eldermoor, who had been dead for 4 days and had been my mother for 41 years. "Cael," I said, "Prince Cael of the House of Harrogate, second son of the late King Edvard, brother of the king. You want my titles, serjeant. I'll give you the lot. It takes a while. Most of them are for things I've never done." "Thank you, sir," he said, and he raised his other hand to a radio at his shoulder, and he said quietly, "Postern to control. I have a claim of identity, royal, unscheduled, requesting a verifying officer." And then he stood there, in the sleet, with me, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he did not look away, and he did not look at me either, and I stood in front of my own house like a man selling brushes. It took 11 minutes. I counted them on the clock over the stable arch, which had been slow by 4 minutes my entire childhood and was still slow by 4 minutes. And in those 11 minutes I decided. The way you decide things at 1 in the morning when you are tired and grieving and 41, and full of a rage you have been carrying so long it has worn a groove, that I hated him. That is where this begins, not with the question. The question came later, and it was a better question than I deserved to ask, and I have spent a long time since trying to be worth the answer. But it begins with a white glove in the sleet, and a man who would not let me into my own house until the paperwork said he could. His name was Cael. I did not learn it that night. He did not offer it, and I did not ask, because I was too busy hating him to be curious. The verifying officer came at last, a young lieutenant with his tunic half-buttoned, and his face the color of a man who has just been woken and told which prince is standing at his gate, and he did the thing that I had wanted the sergeant to do, which was to fall over himself. He apologized 9 times in 40 seconds. He called me sir, and then your highness, and then something that was not a word at all. He waved me through with both arms, as if he were landing an aircraft. And as I went past, I stopped, because I could not help myself, and I said to the sergeant, "You could have done that 11 minutes ago." "Yes, sir," he said. "But you didn't." "No, sir." "Why not?" And he said level, unhurried, without one grain of apology in it, "Because I don't know you, sir. I only know your face." Then he faced front again, and the sleet came down on him, and I went inside to see my mother. I should tell you what I was in those days, so that you understand the size of what happened to me later. I was the spare, not of this generation, of the last one. My brother Alaric was born to be king and was, and my sister Adela was born to be the one who actually gets things done and is, and I came along 9 years after Adela, when the nursery had been shut and the staff reduced, and everybody had stopped expecting anything. And I spent my whole life being introduced as asterisk, and this is Cael with a little downward turn at the end of the sentence, like a man remembering he has one more parcel in the car. I did the duties. For 20 years, the ribbon, the plaque, the handshake, the regiment I was colonel of and had never commanded, The charity dinners where I said the same 4 sentences and watched people's eyes go over my shoulder to see if anyone more important had come in. I did them well, actually. I was good at the job of being a man who does not matter. And then, 7 years before the sleet and the glove, I stopped. There was no scandal. I want to be clear about that because a great many people have since decided there must have been and have invented one. There was no scandal. There was only a long gray afternoon in a room with pale green walls, where the controller of the household explained to me, kindly, with charts, that my continued presence at certain fixtures was diluting the coverage, and that the palace felt asterisk, as if the building had opinions that I might be more usefully deployed elsewhere, somewhere with a smaller press pool, somewhere abroad. And nobody argued with him, not Alaric, not Adela. Not my mother, who was sitting in the next room and who I was sure could hear every word. So I went. I took a flat in a city where nobody knew what a Harrogate was, and I taught myself to be nobody, which is harder than it sounds and much harder than being a prince. And I did not write, and nobody wrote to me. And after 7 years of nobody writing to me, I had built a very complete and very satisfying theory of the world. Here is the theory. Everything in a palace is bought. The smiles are bought. The tears at the funerals are bought. The men who stand at the doors with rifles and beautiful posture are bought most cheaply of all, because they cost 11 crowns a week and a decent coat, and they will stand for whoever holds the keys. And if the keys changed hands tomorrow, they would stand for the new man by lunchtime and never blink. Loyalty, I had decided, is simply a word rich people use for a service they have not itemized. I believed that. Understand that I believed it, the way you believe the floor is there. It had cost me a great deal to build, and it explained everything that had happened to me, and it let me sleep. And if you take a man's theory of the world away from him at 1 in the morning, you had better have something to put in its place. Cael did. That is the whole story, really. But we are not there yet. They had laid her in the lantern chapel. It is not a large room. People imagine something like a cathedral, and it is not. It is a long stone hall on the north side of the old wing, with a barrel ceiling and a floor worn into shallow dishes by 400 years of feet, and it is called the Lantern Chapel because of the lamps, 32 of them, iron, hung on chains at the height of a man's head, and they are lit only for a lying-in state, and they were lit that night. The coffin was oak. It stood on a catafalque draped in the household colors, and on the lid there was a wreath of winter greenery and her circlet, which was smaller than I remembered and looked, under all those lamps, like something a person could pick up and put in a pocket. There was no attendant fuss. There was no music. There were 4 guardsmen, one at each corner, heads bowed over reversed rifles, absolutely still, and there was the sound of the lamps, which is a sound, a faint dry ticking as the iron expands. I stood at the door for a long time. I had rehearsed this in the way you rehearse things on trains. I had a speech. It was addressed to her, and it was very fine, and it was full of the word *u. You let them send me away. You sat in the next room. You never once wrote. And I had polished it for 3 days and 200 miles. And I opened my mouth in the doorway of the Lantern Chapel, and every word of it went out of me like water out of a cracked jug. And what was left was a 41-year-old man, standing in a wet coat with nothing to say to his mother. The nearest guardsman did not look up. None of them did. They stood at their corners with their chins on their chests and their gloved hands crossed on the butts of their rifles, and they gave me the one thing that nobody else in that building was going to give me for the next 9 days, which was the freedom to be a mess in private. I did not know it was a gift. I thought it was indifference. I walked up the aisle and I put my hand on the oak, which was cold, and I stood there with my hand on my mother's coffin in front of 4 strangers, and I thought, they are being paid to watch this. That is the kind of man I was. The family saw me the next morning, which in that house means I was seen by the family, one at a time, as if I were a specialist appointment. Adela first. My sister came into the blue room with a folder under her arm and put it down and looked at me for a long moment, and then embraced me hard enough to hurt, which surprised me so much I nearly fell over. "You look terrible," she said. "I've been traveling." "You've been sulking, on a boat apparently." She held me at arm's length. Adela is 9 years older than me and looks like a hawk that has been to a very good school. The funeral is on the 9th. You'll walk behind the gun carriage with Alaric and Rowan. You'll wear the sash. You'll say nothing to anyone with a microphone. And you'll stand a night of the kin watch because she asked for it, and because if you don't, every paper in the realm will run the same story and I will not have that story run. "What story?" "The prince who wouldn't stand." She let go of me. "Don't give it to them, Cael, not this week." "And if I want to?" She picked up the folder again. She looked tired then, properly tired, not press-tired, and for the first time I noticed that my sister had gone gray at the temples while I was away being nobody in a foreign city. "Then you'd be exactly the man you've been telling yourself you aren't," she said, "and I'd be the last person in this family still pretending otherwise, and I'm too old to do that job." She got as far as the door. "She wrote to you," Adela said without turning around. "No," I said, "she didn't." And my sister stood with her hand on the door handle for about 2 seconds, and I have gone back to those 2 seconds 1,000 times, because everything I needed was in them and I was too proud to reach out and take it, and then she said, "Have it your way," and went out. Alaric saw me at 4 in the afternoon, in the long study, standing up. He did not sit, so I did not sit. We are that sort of family. My brother, the king, is a tall man who has been photographed so often that he has forgotten how to hold his face when he isn't being. He said the correct things. He said them in the correct order. He was sorry I had heard the news late. There had been a difficulty with the address. The household would of course see to my accommodation. The arrangements were as follows. He spoke for 4 minutes without a single sentence in which the word "she" was the subject. "Are we going to talk about her at all?" I said. "We are burying her on the 9th, Alaric said. "That is talking about her." "That's staging her." "Yes." He looked at me then, and there was something moving behind his face, far down, like a fish under ice. "That is what we do, Cael. We stage things. You used to be quite good at it." "I used to be quite good at doing what I was told." "There is a difference," he said, "and one day you may be old enough to see it." I left the long study wanting to break something, and because I am not a man who breaks things, I did what I have always done instead, which is worse. I went looking for something to say. I could not sleep. Of course I could not sleep. They had put me in the East Wing, in a room I had never lived in, with a bed made up so tightly that getting into it felt like a violation of protocol, and at 2:30 I gave up and went down through the dark house in my shirt sleeves to the Lantern Chapel, because it was the only room in that building that was awake. It was different at 3 in the morning. The lamps had burned down to a deep orange. The stone had gone cold enough to feel through the soles of my shoes. The public had been gone for hours, and the flowers had been taken away for the night, and there was nobody in that long hall except my mother in her box, and one guardsman standing the near corner, and the ticking of 32 iron lamps. 1, not 4. I learned later that they cut the vigil to a single sentry between 2 and 5 when the doors are shut. It is the emptiest watch there is. They call it the dead hour, and they do not say it fondly. The guardsman was Cael. I knew him at once, without the sleet and the greatcoat, and something in me went hot and very glad, the way it does when you have been carrying a grievance around all day, and it finally finds somewhere to put itself down. He was standing at the head of the coffin with his head bowed, rifle reversed, and he did not look up when I came in, and he did not look up when I walked the length of that hall with my footsteps going off the barrel ceiling like a man knocking on a door, and he did not look up when I stopped 4 feet from him and stood there. "You're the one from the gate," I said. Nothing. You know, I could have you moved. One word. You'd be on a laundry door in the west wing by breakfast. Nothing, not a flicker, not a tightening at the jaw. He was not ignoring me. I want to be exact about this because it matters. He was not ignoring asterisk me. He was asterisk elsewhere, in some place I could not reach, doing something I could not see, and I was a noise happening near him. I have never in my life been so completely, so calmly, so entirely irrelevant. Do you know who she was? I said. My voice came out wrong. To you, not the woman on the coin. Do you have the first idea who is in that box? And the sergeant of the household guard raised his head 1 degree and looked at the coffin, and then bowed it again. That was all. That was the whole of it. And I looked at that, and my theory of the world reached out and grabbed it and told me what it was, and my theory said, he is very well trained. Somebody pays him to do that. So I leaned in a little closer, and I asked him my question for the first time. Who are you actually loyal to, Sergeant? I said. Not the answer they gave you, the real one, the crown, the man, or the money. The lamps ticked. And Cael stood in the dead hour beside my mother's coffin and said absolutely nothing at all, and I went back up to my room in a fury I could taste, and I did not understand. I would not understand for 8 more days, and it would cost him almost everything I had, that he had not refused to answer me. He was on duty. He was not permitted to speak. And when they finally took his post away from him and put him in a plain coat, and told him he had no duty left to be silent for, he answered me. That is not the story. That is only the shape of it. The story is what he said. I went back the next night, and the night after that. I told myself it was grief. Grief is a wonderful excuse. It will cover almost anything, and people are too polite to check. But it was not grief that took me down those stairs at 3 in the morning with my collar open and my hands in my pockets. It was appetite. There was a man in my house who would not react to me, and I had spent 7 years in a foreign city where nobody reacted to me, and I had come home to a family that would not react to me, and here at last was one single human being whose entire profession consisted of standing still while I talked, and I could not leave him alone. I know how that sounds. I am not defending it. I am telling you what I was. The second night I stood at the foot of the catafalque and asked him what the household paid a sergeant of the vigil. He said nothing. So I told him. I had gone into the library at midnight like a burglar and found the household establishment tables and run my finger down to sergeant, guard, foot asterisk, and I had carried the figure downstairs like a weapon. 11 crowns and 4, I said. A week, plus quarters, plus boots, for 9 days of nights beside a dead queen. I let it sit. That's what she's worth then, 11 crowns and 4. He stood with his head bowed, and the lamplight running along the barrel of the reversed rifle, and he did not so much as breathe wrong. The third night I brought a chair. I dragged it the whole length of the lantern chapel, deliberately, so that the legs shrieked on the stone, and I set it down 8 feet from him, and I sat in it like a man at a play, and I talked at him for 50 minutes. I told him things I had never told anybody. I told him about the room with the pale green walls and the controller with his charts. I told him about the 7 years. I told him that in all that time not one letter had come from this house. Not one. Not at midwinter. Not on my birthday. Not when I was ill. That a family which could produce 140 official communications, a year about the Queen Mother's health, could not produce 1 line of ink for her second son. I told him that everyone in the building had known, and no one had cared, and that he was standing guard over the corpse of a woman who had let it happen. I was crying by the end of it. I did not notice until my face was cold. And Cael stood at his corner in the dead hour and gave me nothing. Not a word, not a look, nothing but that bowed head and those crossed white gloves and the ticking of the lamps. I want to tell you what I saw in that silence, because it is the hinge of everything. I saw a servant. I saw a hired man so completely owned that he would not spend a single syllable on a grieving prince without a warrant for it, because the warrant is what he serves. I saw the whole rotten machinery of the place standing there in a red tunic, and I hated him with a purity that was almost joy. What was actually happening, what any guardsman in the realm could have told me in 4 words if I had ever in my life asked a guardsman anything, was that a sentry on a vigil post does not speak. Not to the public, not to the household, not to the family, not to the king. He may speak to give an order or a warning or to answer his officer. That is all. The silence is not deference. It is the post. He was not refusing me. He was holding. And he held for 4 nights while a member of the royal house sat 8 feet away and pulled his life apart out loud. And he never once turned his head. And I have since learned that on the 4th of those nights, his relief found him at 5 in the morning with his jaw locked so tight that he could not say the words of the handover, and had to write them. He never reported me, not once, not to his officer, not to the captain, not to anyone. I found that out later too. I asked him why much later when we were something like friends, and he thought about it for a while and said, "You weren't shouting at me, sir." But that is later. On the 5th night I did the thing that nearly destroyed him. I had decided he had a price. That is what my theory required, you see. A theory has requirements. If the men at the doors are bought, then this man is bought. And if this man is bought, then he has a number, and if I found the number I would be right, and being right had become the only warm thing left in my life. So on the 5th night, I went down to the Lantern Chapel with an envelope. It was a palace envelope, heavy cream, from the writing desk in my room. Inside it I had put every note I had in my wallet, which was not a fortune but was a great deal more than 11 crowns and 4 it was. I worked out afterwards about 8 months of him, and I had sealed it with the wax and the ring, because I wanted him to see the ring. I wanted the whole thing to be as vulgar as it could possibly be. That was the point. I wanted him to take it, and I wanted to watch him take it, and then I was going to go upstairs and sleep for a week. He was at the head of the coffin, same corner, same bowed head. I walked up and I held the envelope out flat on my palm, at the height of his crossed hands, and I said, "Tell me one true thing about her and it's yours. One, anything. What she said, what she wore, whether she liked you. You've stood over her for 5 nights, sergeant. You must have something. Tell me one true thing and take the money." I have played that moment back so many times that it has worn smooth. He did not look at the envelope. That is the thing. Most men look. It is not even greed. It is just the eye going where the hand goes. He did not look at it, and he did not look at me, and nothing in his face changed at all. And then he lifted his chin off his chest and turned his head, very slowly, and for the first and last time in that chapel Cael looked at me. He had gray eyes and about 40 years on him and a small white scar through one eyebrow, and he looked at me for perhaps 2 seconds, and there was no contempt in it. That is what I could not survive. There was no contempt in it and there was no anger in it. There was something much worse, and it took me a year to find the word for it, and the word is patience asterisk. Then he faced front and bowed his head and became a statue again. And I stood there like a fool, with 8 months of a man's wages in my hand. I could not put it in my pocket. Do you understand? I had made the gesture too large. I could not simply fold it away and walk out. It would have been an admission, and I was not yet the sort of man who could admit anything. So I did the stupidest thing I have ever done in a life with a good deal of competition in it. I put the envelope on the ledge of the catafalque, at his feet, at the foot of my mother's coffin, and I said, "It's there when you want it," and I walked out. Behind me, 32 lamps ticked. And in the gallery above the west door of the Lantern Chapel, where the cleaning staff go up to change the chains, a footman named Nils Pardo was standing in the dark with a telephone in his hand, filming the whole thing. You cannot see what happened next on the film. That is the entire tragedy of it. The gallery is high and behind him, so what the film shows is this. A prince of the house of Harrogate holding out a sealed palace envelope, and a serjeant of the household guard, and then the envelope on the ledge, and then the prince walking away. What the film does not show, because it stops there, because Pardo had what he wanted and 11 seconds is all you need to end a man, is Sergeant Cael standing that post for another hour and 50 minutes without touching it. Nor does it show what he did at 5 past 5 when his relief came up, and the handover was made and he was, for the first time in 7 hours, permitted to move. He did not put it in his tunic. He did not hand it to his relief. He picked it up. I have this from guardsman Tam Beckett, who was the relief, and who was 19 and terrified of him, and has never lied about anything in his life. He picked it up between 2 fingers, holding it flat, and he carried it down to the guardroom under the arch, and he woke the duty corporal, and he had the corporal witness the seal, and he entered it in the book of the watch. 0314. Property found on post Lantern Chapel, head of catafalque. 1 envelope sealed, unopened, arms of a member of the royal household, not opened, not weighed, lodged in the found property drawer pending the controller's instruction. Cael, sergeant, witnessed, A. Doyle CPL. Then he wrote out a receipt in his own hand, in block capitals, and he signed it, and he put the receipt in the drawer with the envelope, and he went off shift and walked 2 miles home in the dark to a flat above a bakery, where his wife Nessa was already up because she was always up when he came off nights, and he sat down at the kitchen table and did not tell her about any of it. I did not know 1 word of that, not one. For 6 more days I believed he had taken it. The lying-in state ran 9 days, and on the 6th there was a reception. It was called a reception for the morning delegations, which is a phrase that ought to be carved over the door of every palace on earth. 41 delegations. 300 people in black in the gold gallery, drinking sherry at 11 in the morning under a ceiling full of painted gods, and a string quartet playing at a volume calculated so that nobody could hear anything anybody said, which is the whole art of palace catering. I had drunk nothing. I want that on the record too, because a version exists in which I was drunk, and it is a kind version, and I will not have it. Everything I did that morning, I did in my right mind. I had been placed. That is what they do to you. You are placed. I was between a deputy minister and a churchman, being asked for the 9th time in an hour whether I was * back for good, and behind me, along the wall at 4-yard intervals, rifles at the shoulder, stood the vigil detail of the household guard, including Sergeant Cael. I turned round and saw him, and something went off in my chest like a struck match. 6 days of that chapel, 5 nights of talking to a wall, 8 months of a man's wages sitting in his pocket. That is what I believed, that is what I had built, and here he was, polished, immaculate at the wall of the gold gallery, while 300 people in black ate small pastries beneath a painted sky. I did not decide to do it. I have never once been able to find in memory the moment where I chose. I put down my glass and I crossed the floor, and the room began, in that way rooms do, to notice. Sergeant Cael, I said. He was on ceremonial post. He came to attention. There was that beautiful, terrible crack of the boot on parquet, and he looked straight ahead over my shoulder at the far wall, because that is what the post requires. Sir, I have a question, I said, and I would like an answer this time in front of these good people, since apparently we can't have one in private. Adela was already moving. I saw her out of the corner of my eye, coming through the crowd from 30 feet away with her face perfectly composed, and her whole body saying * no *, and she was not going to reach me in time, and she knew it. The quartet went on playing. Who are you loyal to? I said. I said it loudly. I want that recorded as well. That's the question, Sergeant, and I'll narrow it for you because I've had 6 nights to think about it and I've got it down to 3. The * crown, I put 1 finger up. That's the official answer, the bit of gold in the case that nobody's worn since the coronation. Very good, very heraldic, or the man asterisk, 2 fingers. The king, whichever king. There have been 3 in your service, I'm told, and there'll be a 4th, and you'll stand for him too, and the tunic won't change. Or, and here I did the thing that 6 months later I could not read about without having to put the paper down. Or is it the asterisk money? 11 crowns and 4 a week, and whatever else comes to a man who stands in the right room at the right hour. The quartet, God help them, played on. Which is it? I said. The crown, the man, or the money? Because I have watched you for 6 nights, and I would very much like to know what it is you actually serve. And 300 people stopped eating pastries. Serjeant Cael stood at attention against the painted gods of the gold gallery, eyes front, chin level, and he answered me. He was on ceremonial post, and a member of the royal house had put a direct question to him in the hearing of the household, and the regulations of the guard say that where he cannot properly answer, he shall give the form of words. So he gave me the form of words. To the crown, sir, he said. Under the crown to the king, in all things, sir. It came out flat. It came out the way you give a service number. It was the correct answer, the whole and only answer he was permitted to give in that room to that question by a man like me. And it was, I am ashamed to say, exactly what I had prayed for. Because it was a slogan, and you can tear a slogan apart in front of 300 people. There it is, I said, and I turned to the room. I performed it. I gave them my profile. 7 years of ribbon cutting had taught me exactly where to stand. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, word perfect. He's had it in his mouth since he was 18. Ask a man what he believes and he gives you the drill book. I looked back at him. You don't serve anything, sergeant. You're asterisk rented asterisk. You'd stand for a butcher if they gave you the coat. There is a sound a very large room makes when 300 people all decide at once not to look at something. It is not silence. It is a sort of soft collapse, a rustle, 300 people turning half a degree away, and I stood in the middle of it, glowing, righteous, 41 years old. Cael did not move. Of course he did not move. He was at attention on a ceremonial post at a state occasion, and the man who had just called him outranked every soul in the building except 2, and he stood there with his eyes on the far wall and let it land. My sister arrived at my elbow. She did not touch me. She said, without moving her lips, in a voice pitched for me alone, "Walk with me." Now. And behind us, in the crowd, 4 different people had their telephones out, and one of them was a footman named Nils Pardo, who already had 11 seconds of film in his pocket that was worth more to a broadsheet than he would earn in a decade. Adela walked me out through the service passage, past the trolleys and the stacked chairs, and into a small, unlovely room where the flowers were kept, and she shut the door and stood with her back against it. Do you know what you've just done? I've asked a question nobody in this building has ever had the nerve to. You've ended him. She said it quietly, which was worse. You have stood in front of the entire diplomatic corps and told them that a sergeant of the household guard is for sale, and he was standing at attention, and he could not say one word back to you. Not one, Cael. Do you understand the position he was in? Do you understand that the only asterisk thing he was allowed to do in that room was stand there and take it? Then he shouldn't be in a job where... He shouldn't be in a job. Adela pushed off the door. Listen to yourself. You've spent 7 years telling anyone who'd sit still that this family treats people as furniture, and this morning you treated a man as furniture in front of 300 witnesses because he couldn't hit back, and you did it well, Cael. You have a lovely profile and you know exactly where the light is. Stop. I watched you enjoy it. We stood in the flower room among the buckets. He took my money, I said. Adela's face changed. He what? 5 nights ago, in the chapel, I offered him, I put an envelope in front of him and I said, tell me one true thing about her and it's yours, and he wouldn't even look at me and I left it on the ledge and it's gone. My voice was doing something I did not have control over. It's asterisk gone asterisk Adela. I went down the next night. The ledge was empty. So don't stand there and tell me about that man's honor, because I bought it for the price of a used car, and he didn't even have the decency to say thank you. My sister looked at me for a long moment. You, she said, are going to regret that more than anything you have ever said in your life. Then she opened the door and left me in the flower room, and she was, as usual, entirely right. The film went up that night. 2 films spliced, 11 seconds in the Lantern Chapel, then 90 seconds in the Gold Gallery. Somebody with a good ear had stripped the string quartet out and pushed my voice up, and there it was, my own voice, very clear and very well bred, saying the crown, the man, or the money, and you're rented and you'd stand for a butcher if they gave you the coat, and then a cut back to the chapel, to the envelope with the seal on it, going down on the ledge at the foot of my mother's coffin. The headline in the largest broadsheet in the realm was 6 words long. Prince offers cash to Queen's Guard. I want you to understand what that story said, because I did not understand it myself for the first 8 hours. It did not say what I had done. Nobody cared what I had done. Princes behaving badly is not news, it is weather. The story said what he had done. The story said, here is a serjeant of the household guard, one of the 4 men chosen to stand the vigil of the Queen Mother, and here he is being handed a sealed envelope at the head of her coffin, and here is the envelope on the ledge, and here is the serjeant. And where the story asked, in a very reasonable tone, over 11 seconds of silent film, where is that envelope now? By 10, the next morning, there were 9 photographers outside a bakery in the Fenlow Road. By 11, the controller of the household had suspended Serjeant Cael from duty pending an inquiry into conduct prejudicial to the good name of the household, and had removed him from the vigil of the Queen Mother of Eldermoor. His name was Sir Anselm Dreer. He had been controller for 19 years, and he was the man with the charts and the pale green room, and he had a voice like a hand smoothing a tablecloth. I went to see him because I actually assumed this, that he would be furious with me. He was delighted with me. A regrettable business, Sir Anselm said, pouring tea. Very regrettable, but the household's position is quite clear, sir, and I think you'll find it protects everyone. Including yourself, if I may say so. Protects me. The story is now about the serjeant. He handed me the cup. It is not about you, do you see? A prince in grief may say an intemperate thing at a difficult time. The public forgives that in a week. But a guardsman who may or may not have accepted money at a lying-in state, that is a story with legs, sir. That will run for a month. And by the time it has finished running, nobody will remember the man who made the offer at all. I put down the cup because my hand was not steady. You're feeding him to them, I said. I am managing a situation. Sir Anselm's face did not move. You created it. I am managing it. If you would prefer, I can go out to the gate at noon and tell 400 journalists that the Queen Mother's second son offered a serving soldier 8 months of his wages to gossip about his own mother's corpse, and we can all see how that runs alongside the funeral. Shall I do that, sir? I shall need it in writing. You could just tell the truth. The truth, he said, is a very large object, sir. In 19 years I have found that a great many people are crushed by it and nobody is ever fed. He picked up his own tea. The serjeant will have his inquiry. If he is innocent, he will be reinstated in some weeks, and by then the funeral will be over and the household intact. That is the arrangement, sir. The actual arrangement, which you have been complaining about at dinner parties for 7 years, without once troubling to learn how it works. And if it finds against him, then he will be dismissed the service without a pension, said Sir Anselm Dreer, which will also be very regrettable. I sat in the pale green room with the tea going cold in my hand, and I understood, finally, 7 years too late, exactly what had happened to me in that room and exactly what I had just done to somebody else in it. I had spent my whole exile believing that this house destroys people. I was right. I had simply never noticed that it does not do it by itself. It waits, quite patiently, for somebody to hand it a man. I had handed it a man. Adela found me in the lantern chapel at midnight. There was a strange guardsman at the head of the coffin. That was the first thing I had noticed, and the thing I could not stop noticing. A stranger at the head in Cael's corner. She sat down on the step beside me, in a 500-pound coat, on a stone floor, which is the only time in my life I have seen my sister do anything undignified. She asked for him, Adela said. What? Mother. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the coffin. The instructions for her lying-in state are 11 pages long, and she wrote them herself 4 years ago, and she made me witness them, and there is a paragraph on page 9 about the vigil. She asks that the head corner, the head, Cael, the corner at her head, be stood by Serjeant Cael of the household guard, by name, for as many of the night watches as he is willing to take. The lamps ticked. By name, I said. By name. Why? And my sister said, because for 4 years he was the only person in this palace who kept her hours. Here is what she told me on that step, and here is what I did not know, because I had not been there, because I had made very sure not to be there. In the last years of her life, the Queen Mother could not sleep. It came on after our father died and never left. She would go under at 10 and come up at 2, wide awake, in a house of 400 rooms with nobody in any of them. She would not ring for anyone. She would not have a nurse in the room. She would not take the tablets because she said they made her stupid, and she had been a great many things in her life but never that, and she would not start at 80. So she walked. She walked the long gallery, the upper one, the cold one with the portraits, from the north end to the south end and back, in a dressing gown and walking shoes, between 2 and 5 in the morning, 4 or 5 nights a week, for 4 years. And there is a sentry post at the south end of the long gallery. It is a bad post, the coldest station in the building, the emptiest, where nothing has happened in 300 years, and it is stood every night from 2 until 5 by one man. The first night she came down, Adela said, he challenged her. He what? He didn't know who she was. It was 3 in the morning and she was in a dressing gown and he'd been in the household 9 weeks, and there was an old woman coming down the long gallery in the dark, and he did exactly what the standing orders say. He challenged her. She told me she nearly died of the shock and then laughed for about a minute and a half, and she said it was the first time in 15 years that anybody in this house had asked her who she was rather than telling her. I put my head in my hands. She went down the next night, Adela said, and the next. And he stood his post and she walked, and neither of them said one word, because he was on duty and she knew perfectly well what that meant. She was a soldier's daughter, Cael. She knew exactly what that meant, better than you ever have. She said he never once spoke to her. She said he never once looked at her. And she said that in the whole of the last 4 years of her life, the only 3 hours of the day she wasn't lonely were the 3 hours she spent walking past a man who wasn't allowed to talk to her. That's not, my voice had gone. That doesn't make any sense, Adela. Doesn't it? She turned and looked at me for the first time. You've been alone for 7 years. Would you rather have been alone in an empty room, or alone in a room with somebody standing in it? I did not answer her. He brought her a chair, Adela said. Not to sit with her, he'd never have sat and she'd never have asked. He found an old library chair somewhere and he put it at the south end by the window on the 2nd week, and after that it was always there and she used it and neither of them ever mentioned it. That's the whole of it. 4 years. He never spoke, he never presumed, he never told a soul, and when the papers were offering money for anything at all about her health, and they were, Cael, they were offering serious money, and he was the one man in the realm who knew she was walking the halls at 3 in the morning because she was frightened of the dark. He never breathed a word to anybody, not even to his wife. I asked her. She didn't know. She stood up. She brushed the dust of the chapel floor off a coat worth more than his flat. "That is who you called rented asterisk," my sister said, "in front of 300 people, and now he's suspended and he isn't at her head, and there's a stranger in his corner on the night before we bury her, and she asked for him by name." She got to the door. "And there's one more thing," Adela said, "and I am only telling you because if I don't tell you tonight I never will, and you will go back to your foreign city and you will die at 80 still believing it, and I find I can't have that on my conscience." "Adela." "She wrote to you," my sister said, "every month for 7 years. They were in a hat box. That is the detail I cannot get past, even now. Not a strong box, not a bureau, not some solemn drawer with a lock on it. A hat box, on the top shelf of a wardrobe in a dressing room that smelled of camphor and violet, and Adela stood on a chair and got it down and put it in my hands and walked out and shut the door and left me alone with it. There were 83 letters in that box. Every one of them was addressed to me, in her hand, at the flat I had taken when I left. The flat I had lived in for 11 months and then given up in a hurry because the rent went up, and I had moved 4 streets away and told nobody, because there was nobody to tell, because I had spent 11 months proving to myself that nobody in that house would ever write. Every one of them had come back. They were stamped across the front in a foreign post office's blunt red ink. Returned no such addressee, 83 times. Every month for 7 years, an old woman who could not sleep had walked down to the post table in the long gallery and put a letter into the system of an empire. And every month the system had brought it back to her, and she had put it in a hat box, and the next month she had written another one. They were not sealed. That is the thing that finished me. She had opened every returned envelope herself. To check the address, I suppose, to see where the fault was, and then simply put the letter back in and set it aside, so that when I finally sat down on the floor of her dressing room at 1 in the morning and took the first one out, it came out easily and unfolded easily, and there was her handwriting, going a little more crooked with each year, and the first line of the first letter said, "My dear Cael, I have started this 11 times, and I am going to send this one whatever state it is in, because I am told you have gone, and I would rather be a foolish old woman with a letter in the post than a proud one with a drawer full of them." I read for 4 hours. She wrote about the garden. She wrote about the dogs. She wrote about a boiler that had failed in the West Wing in a way she found personally insulting. She wrote about her hip twice and then never again, and I understood why. And she wrote in the 5th year on a single sheet, in a hand that shook, "I do not defend what was done to you. I was in the next room and I heard it and I said nothing, and I have had 4 years to find a reason for that and have not found one, and I am too old to invent one. So I will simply tell you that I was afraid of them, and that this is a bad thing for a queen to be, and a worse thing for a mother." And in the last letter, dated 11 weeks before she died, she wrote, "I have taken to walking at night. There is a young man who stands at the end of the gallery, and we have never spoken, and I have grown very fond of him. He does not know a thing about me, and does not want anything from me, and stands there anyway, which is the entire difference, my darling, between being served and being loved, and it has taken me 81 years and a bad hip to learn it. Come home, not for the funeral, before. I shall keep writing. One of these days you will move back into the light, and one of them will find you." I sat on the floor of my mother's dressing room with 83 returned letters around me in a ring, and the clock in the stable arch struck 3, 4 minutes slow, exactly as it had struck when I was 6. And I got up and I put on my coat and I went to find him. I made it worse. Naturally, I made it worse. I had been making things worse for 7 years with a consistency that ought to have won me a decoration, and I was not going to stop now, at 4 in the morning, with a hat box under my arm. I took a car from the Mews without telling anybody, which is not a thing a member of the royal house can do, and I discovered why at the end of the Fenlow Road, where 11 photographers were asleep in 3 cars outside a bakery, and where the noise of a palace car turning into a narrow street at 4:30 in the morning woke every one of them at once. I want to be fair to myself for one sentence, because I have not been in any of the others. I did not know they were there. When I saw them, I could have driven on and nobody would ever have known. I did not drive on. I walked past 11 photographers to a green door beside a bakery, and I put my thumb on the bell and I kept it there, in a storm of shudders, with my mother's letters under my arm. The light went on upstairs. The woman who opened that door was about 50, in a dressing gown, with her arms folded, and she stood in the doorway of her own home with the flash guns going off behind me like weather, and she looked at me the way you look at something the tide has left. "Mrs. Cael," I said, "I need to speak to your husband." "No," said Nessa Cael. "You don't understand. I've come to." "I know what you've come to do." Her voice was very steady and very tired. "You've come to feel better. It's 4 in the morning and there's 100 people on my street and my daughter's got her nursing exams in 9 days, and she can't get to the college door without being asked whether her father's a thief, and you've come to my house, in a palace car, to feel better." Behind her, in the hall, at the foot of the stairs, I saw him. He was in a jumper and stockinged feet, and without the tunic and the bearskin he was a shorter man than I had believed, a plain man in his 40s with a gray stubble and a scar through one eyebrow, standing in his own hall at 4:30 in the morning with a mug of tea in his hand, and he was looking at me. And he did not say a word. "Serjeant," I said, "Cael, Ossian, listen to me. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to stand up in front of them, and I'm going to tell them exactly what I did and exactly what you didn't." "Sir," he said. It stopped me dead. It was the first word he had spoken to me since the Gold Gallery. "I'm under inquiry," he said. "I'm not permitted to discuss the matter with any person connected to it, and I'm not permitted to receive any person connected to it. That's the regulation, sir. If I stand here and talk to you in front of that lot, it's over. Not the story, me." He put the mug down on the shelf by the stairs, very carefully, as though it were the last thing in the house that was still under his control. "You'd be doing it in kindness. But you'd be doing it. Then let me in and shut the door." "They've photographed you on the step," he said. "That's already enough." We looked at each other down that little hall. "Go home, sir," said Ossian Cael. And his wife shut the door in my face, gently, which was the worst part, and I stood on a step in the Fenlow Road with 83 letters under my arm, while 11 men photographed me from 4 feet away. "Princess Dawn Call A.T. Suspended Guards Home," said the afternoon edition. And underneath, in smaller type, the thing that Sir Anselm Dreer read aloud to me in the pale green room with an expression of profound sorrow. Sources within the household described the visit as extraordinary, and questioned what understanding might exist between the 2 men. "You have now made him look bought," said the controller, "by buying him twice." I went to my brother. It was the 8th day. The funeral was the 9th. Alaric received me in the long study, standing up as always, and I had rehearsed nothing this time, and I think that is the only reason any of it got through. I told him everything: the gate, the chapel, the 5 nights, the envelope, the wages I had looked up in the library like a burglar, the Gold Gallery. Everything in order, with nothing taken out to make me look better, which took 11 minutes and was the hardest 11 minutes of my life up to that point, and is not even in the first 3 now. And then I told him about the hat box. Alaric stood at the window with his back to me for a long time. "What do you want?" "I want him back at her head, tomorrow. She asked for him by name, it's in her own instructions, and he's got a stranger standing in his corner because of me. I want the inquiry stopped, and I want you to say publicly that he refused the money." No. I had not expected the word. I had expected argument, terms, conditions, the long grinding machinery of a decision. I had not expected one syllable. No. The household cannot be seen to bend to you. He turned round. Of all the people on this earth, Cael, it cannot bend to you asterisk. You broke this man in public because you wanted an argument, and if I now reach down and mend him in public because you have asked me to, then everything you said about us in the gold gallery becomes true. Then we asterisk are a family that decides a soldier's honor according to the mood of a prince. If I do what you want, I prove your point. And your point is a lie, and I will not have it made true in order to make you feel clean. He'll be dismissed asterisk. He will be asterisk inquired into, said the king, by an officer of the household on the evidence. That is what he is entitled to, not my favor. The evidence. And then, in a voice I had never heard from my brother in my life, he said, "Find me the evidence, and I will move mountains before breakfast. Bring me your feelings, and I can do nothing at all, and I will not pretend otherwise to spare you." I stood there with my hands open. "I don't have any evidence," I said. "I gave him the money, it's gone, that's the evidence." "Then God help him," said Alaric, "and God help you." He turned back to the window. And then, without looking round, in the flattest voice imaginable, my brother said the only thing he ever said to me about the 7 years. I didn't write either. The clock in the stable arch ticked. "I told myself you wouldn't read it," Alaric said. "I told myself that for 7 years, and I made a very good case, and I have had 4 days now to sit with the fact that our mother wrote 83 times without any evidence whatsoever that you would read a single one, and that she was braver than I am, and that she was braver than I am." He said it twice. He did not notice he had said it twice. "That's all. Go and get some sleep. We bury her at 11. I did not sleep. At 2:30 in the morning on the day of my mother's funeral, I went down through the dark house, past the strange guardsmen at the head of the coffin, past 32 lamps ticking in the cold, out through the north door, into the forecourt, where it had begun to rain. I do not know what I was looking for. I have never known. I think I simply could not be in a room. And that is how I came to be standing in the rain in the forecourt of the palace of Harrogate at 2:50 in the morning, in a coat over my pajamas, when I saw a man on the far side of the railings. He was standing outside the gate. Not at it, not against it. He was standing outside the perimeter, on the public pavement, on the wet stones, 8 feet back from the iron, with his hands at his sides and his head bare, and the rain coming straight down on him. And he was looking through the railings at the lit windows of the lantern chapel, where the lamps were burning over my mother's coffin, and he was standing exactly as he would have stood inside it. Feet together, shoulders square, head bowed. He had been suspended from duty. He had been removed from the vigil. He was in a plain, wet coat, and there was no rifle and no tunic and no bearskin, and no orders and no pay, and no one on earth watching him except a footman in the gatehouse and a prince in his pajamas. And he had come, at 2:30 in the morning in the rain, 2 miles on foot from a bakery in the Fenlow Road, to stand her watch from the wrong side of the fence. I do not remember crossing the forecourt. I remember the gate, and the wet iron under my hands, and the guard at the postern beginning to say something and then deciding, wisely, to say nothing at all. I came out through the gate, and I walked up to him and I stopped. He did not straighten, he did not salute. He was not in uniform and he was not on duty, and he had, at that moment, absolutely no obligation to me of any kind whatsoever, and both of us knew it. Rain ran off my chin. "You're suspended," I said. My voice came out in pieces. "You're suspended. They've taken you off it. Nobody's counting this. Nobody knows you're here. Nobody will ever know you're here." "No, sir," said Cael. "Then what in God's name are you doing?" And he said quite simply, as though I had asked him the time, "It's the dead hour, sir." Something in my chest came apart. "Answer me," I said. "You can answer me now. You're not on post. You're not in the tunic, there's nobody here. There's no inquiry standing behind you, there's nothing at all. So answer me asterisk. Please. And I heard my own voice crack open on the word please asterisk, and I did not care, and I stood in the rain outside my own house at 3 in the morning, and asked a sergeant of the household guard my question for the third and last time. Who are you loyal to? He looked at me. The crown, I said. The man, the money, tell me, sergeant. Tell me the truth and don't say the crown, don't give me the drill book, don't give me the asterisk form of words. I've had the form of words, I've had it my whole life. Everyone in that building gives me the form of words. I was shouting by then into the rain at a man who had every reason on earth to walk away. Who are you loyal to? And serjeant Cael stood in the rain in the dead hour outside the gates of Harrogate, and answered me. Not the crown, sir, he said. He said it the way he did everything, without hurry, without heat, as if he were reading out a list of stores. A crown is a thing in a case. It weighs about 4 pounds and it has a scratch on the left side, and it has never once known my name. The rain came down between us. Not the man either. Men change, sir. I've stood for 3 of them. I stood for your father when I was 19 and had a cold I couldn't shift, and I've stood for your brother. And if I live long enough, I'll stand for your nephew, and I'll stand for whoever comes after him, and none of them will ever know what I take in my tea. A man who's loyal to a asterisk man asterisk is only ever one funeral away from being loyal to nobody. And the money, I said, say it. Say the money. They pay me 11 crowns and 4, sir, he said, as you know because you looked it up, and there was not one grain of malice in it. It's a fair wage for the work, and it goes on the flat and the coal and my girl's fees. It buys my hours. It does not buy that hall. He looked past me, through the railings, at the burning windows of the lantern chapel. So you can put the 3 of them down, said serjeant Cael. None of them is the answer, and I think you knew that when you asked, or you wouldn't have kept coming back. Then what? And he said, I'm loyal to the watch, sir. I stood there with the rain running into my collar. The watch, he said. Not the guard's an outfit. It's got a mess and a pension scheme and a lot of brass. The asterisk watch asterisk. The hour when nothing is happening. The hour when nobody is looking and nothing is expected, and there is no earthly reason for a man to be standing where he is standing, and no one would ever know if he went and sat down. He turned his head and looked at me. That's the only thing I've ever been given that was worth having, sir. Anybody can stand in a parade. There's a band. There's people watching. Any fool can be brave at 11 in the morning with a crowd on both sides. But somebody has to be awake at 3. Somebody has to be standing in a cold gallery where nothing has happened for 300 years, so that everybody who is loved in that house can go to sleep and not think about it. That is the job. That's the whole of it. It looks like nothing, and it is asterisk nothing, 99 nights out of 100. And if you do it properly, nobody will ever be able to point at a single thing you did. And that is what I'm loyal to. Not the crown and not the man and not the money, the empty hour, and whoever has to get through it. The rain came down on the both of us. Your mother had to get through it, he said. 4 years, 2 till 5 most nights. She never rang for anyone, sir. She'd have died first, and I mean that plainly. She'd have lain awake in the dark until it killed her rather than ring a bell and let one soul in that house know she was frightened. So she walked, and I stood. And we never said a word to each other in 4 years, because I was on post and she knew what that meant. And I want you to understand that it was not a asterisk sacrifice asterisk, sir, and it was not a asterisk service, and it was not something anybody could have paid me for or ordered me to do. It was 2 people getting through the same bad hour in the same corridor. That's all it ever was, and it was the honor of my life. He stopped. He seemed to consider whether he had said too much. He decided he had not. You ask me who I serve, said serjeant Cael. I serve whoever is alone in the room. For 4 years that was her. Tonight, sir, it's you. I have been asked many times since what I said to him then. I said nothing. A legend has grown up, and in the legend I say something. In one version I fall on my knees. In another I embrace him, which would have appalled us both. In the version they teach the new intake at the depot, the prince answers with a line so good that I have several times wished I had thought of it. I said nothing. I could not. There was nothing in me to say it with. I stood in the rain in a coat over my pajamas, outside the gates of the house I was born in. On the last night my mother was above ground, and a serjeant of the household guard on 11 crowns and for a week, whom I had called rented in front of 300 people, whom I had ruined, whose daughter could not walk into her own college, who had been thrown out of the funeral he had been asked for by name. That man stood in the rain and told me that he was on watch, and that tonight the watch was me. Everything I had built in 7 years went over like a wall. I do not know how long we stood there, long enough for the rain to get through the coat. At some point I discovered that I was sitting down on the wet curb in the public street with my head in my hands, and that Cael had not sat down, because he does not sit down when he is standing a watch. He was 4 feet away with his hands at his sides, exactly as he had stood in the long gallery for 4 years, not touching me, not comforting me, not saying one word. Just standing there, alone in the room with me, until it was over. At about 5, when the rain had thinned, and the sky over the stables had gone the color of dishwater, he said, "You'll get cold, sir." I lifted my head. "I put an envelope in front of you," I said, "at her head asterisk. I put money in front of you at my mother's head, and I have been telling myself for 8 days that you took it, because if you took it I was right about everything, and if you didn't take it then I have wasted." I could not finish that sentence for a while. "Then I have wasted my whole life being right." Cael looked at the paling sky for a moment. "I didn't take it, sir." "Then where is it?" And Serjeant Cael said, in a voice of the most complete and level indifference, as though it were the least interesting fact in the world, "It's in the found property drawer in the guardroom under the arch with a receipt, where I put it at 14 minutes past 3 on the morning of the 6th, witnessed by Corporal Doyle, and entered in the book of the watch." I stared at him. "You entered it." "Standing orders, sir. Property found on post. Log it, witness it, lodge it, don't open it." He shrugged very slightly. "It's the same regulation whether it's a glove or 8 months' wages. I didn't have to think about it. That's rather the point of a regulation. But you, Cael, for 8 days you've been under inquiry for taking that envelope and it's been sitting in a drawer with your handwriting on it." "Yes, sir." "Then why in God's name didn't you say so?" And he looked at me with something that was almost, but not quite, amusement. "I did, sir," said Cael, "on the first morning, in writing. To the controller of the household. The inquiry sat at 8 o'clock on the morning of the funeral, in the guardroom court under the arch, because Adela made it sit, and my sister, when she decides to make a thing happen, is a natural force with a very good coat. It was chaired by Captain Aurelian Ives, an honest man in an impossible position, who had been told to reach a finding by noon, and had spent 8 days trying to find one that would let him sleep. The controller sat at his right hand. My brother the king sat at the back, in mourning dress, an hour before he was due to walk behind his mother's coffin, and said nothing at all for 40 minutes. And I stood up and gave evidence against myself. I told them what I had done. All of it in order, in a room with 11 people in it and a clock on the wall and a stenographer, and there is a transcript, and I have read it once and will not read it again. I told them about the wages and the library. I told them about the chair I dragged the length of the lantern chapel. I told them the exact words I used in the gold gallery, and I did not soften one of them. And then Corporal Doyle produced the book of the watch, and Captain Ives turned it round on the table so that we could all see the entry, and there, It was in a plain square hand. 0314. Property found on Post Lantern Chapel, head of catafalque. One envelope sealed, unopened, arms of a member of the royal household. Not opened, not weighed. Lodged in the found property drawer, pending the controller's instruction. And then they opened the drawer and brought out the envelope and put it on the table in front of the king. My seal was unbroken. 8 days in a drawer, in a guardroom that is not locked, in a building full of people who read the newspapers. 8 days with 8 months of a sergeant's wages sitting in an unopened envelope 4 yards from where he took his tea, and my seal was unbroken. "Sir Anselm," said Captain Ives, very quietly, "Sergeant Cael states that he reported this to your office in writing on the morning of the 6th. Is that so?" The controller of the household adjusted the papers in front of him. "A report was received," he said. "And where is it?" "It was under consideration." "For 8 days." "Captain Ives," said Sir Anselm Dreer, "there were larger interests at stake, and I do not expect a serving officer to." And my brother stood up at the back of the room. He did not raise his voice. He has never once in his life raised his voice. It is the most frightening thing about him. "You had a soldier's honor in a drawer in your office," said the king, "and you left it there because it was useful to you that the realm should go on wondering. You did that in the week of my mother's funeral. You did it to protect this house asterisk." He picked up the envelope with my seal on it, and he held it up so that everyone in that room could see the ring pressed into the wax. "This house is not a asterisk building asterisk, Sir Anselm. It is not a asterisk coverage strategy. It is the people who are asked to stand in it, and you have spent 19 years mistaking one for the other. And so, God forgive me, have I, and so has my brother, and the difference between us is that we did not know it and you did." He put the envelope down. "Your resignation before the service," said Alaric. "You will not walk with us." And then the King of Eldermoor turned to a serjeant of the household guard, who had been standing at ease against the wall of that room for 40 minutes with his cap under his arm, and had not spoken except when spoken to, and he said, "Sergeant Cael, the inquiry is dismissed and every word of it will be published by noon. You are restored to duty forthwith and to the vigil of the Queen Mother." He paused. "She asked for you by name. I have known that for 4 years, and I never once asked her why. It appears I am the only person in this family who never troubled to ask you anything at all." And Ossian Cael came to attention and said, "Sir." Just that, nothing else. He had been ruined for 8 days by a prince and hung out to dry for 8 days by the household and given back his life in 11 seconds by a king. And what he said was Sir Asterisk. And then he asked Captain Ives whether he might be permitted to draw a clean tunic, as his own was at the cleaner's, and the service was at 11. They buried the Queen Mother of Eldermoor at noon on a grey day, and I walked behind the gun carriage with my brother on my right and my nephew Rowan on my left, and Adela behind us with her chin up, and I have almost no memory of it. I remember the wheels. I remember that Rowan, who is a serious young man and will be a better king than any of us deserve, reached over at the top of the hill and took my hand for about 4 seconds and let go and never mentioned it again. What I remember is the night before, which was the last night of the lying-in state and the kin watch. It is an old thing and a plain thing. From midnight to 1 on the final night, the 4 corners of the catafalque are stood by the family, not by the guard. The rifles are taken away. There is no ceremony, no audience, no photographs. You simply stand where the soldiers stand for 1 hour, and you find out what the hour is like. Alaric took the foot, Adela and Rowan took the sides, and I took the head. Adela asked me, in the corridor, quietly, without any of her usual weapons, and I said yes. And then I stood in Ossian Cael's corner for 1 hour at midnight with my hands crossed in front of me and my head down and 32 iron lamps ticking above me. It is the longest hour I have ever lived. Nothing happens. That is the entire point of it, and I had never understood the point of anything until I stood there. Nobody claps. Your back aches at about 20 minutes and your mind goes through everything you have ever done wrong in a slow and thorough manner. And there is no escape from it. And you cannot sit down, and you cannot speak. And at the end of it, you are simply a man who stood for an hour beside his mother. For 4 years, he did that 3 nights a week and never told anyone. For 4 years, my mother walked past him in the dark, and I had come home and looked at that and asked him what his price was. At 1 o'clock, the guard came back for the last watch, and Sergeant Cael, in a clean tunic, took his post at the head, and I stepped aside and gave him the corner, and neither of us said anything because he was on duty. But as I turned to go, Captain Ives touched my arm and gave me a small thing wrapped in a square of felt and said, "From the sergeant, sir. He asked me to give it to you afterwards, so it wouldn't be a scene." It was a brass disc about the size of a coin, worn nearly smooth. It is called the hour. Every watch in the household carries one. It is passed hand to hand at each relief, and whoever holds it is answerable for the hour, and it is the oldest and stupidest and most beautiful tradition in that whole ridiculous building. On the back of this one, in letters that had been cut by somebody who was not a professional engraver and had taken his time, it said, "For the empty hour." And folded round it was a note, not in his hand, in hers. Small, crooked, 4 years old. "Sergeant, I asked what the token was and you would not tell me on post, so I asked your corporal, who is less disciplined than you and a great deal more talkative. I have had one made. I shall never hold a watch and I know it. But I have held the hour in a dressing gown at 3 in the morning with you at the end of the gallery, and I want you to have this when I am gone, and if my son ever comes home, I want you to give it to him, and I want you to tell him what it is, and I want you to make him stand one. He will argue. He argues with everything. It is the only inheritance his father left him. Make him stand one anyway." ***. I stayed. That is the resolution, and it is not a dramatic one, and I am not going to dress it up. I did not become a good prince. There is no version of this in which I become a good prince. That ship went down years ago with all hands, and I have stopped waving at the water. What I did was smaller. In the 3rd year after the funeral, I opened a house, a real house, 4 floors, in a street where the buses go past too close, and it is open from 11 at night until 6 in the morning and shut all day. That is the whole idea, and everybody told me it was a bad one. It is for people who cannot get through the empty hour, old soldiers who cannot be in the dark, night shift men with nowhere to go at 4, widows in the 1st month, anybody who is awake when they should not be and has run out of walls to look at. There is tea. There is a fire. There is nobody who wants anything from you, and nobody asks you who you are, and there is always somebody standing in the room. We call it the night house. The papers called it a stunt for 11 months and then stopped because we were still open. Cael served 4 more years and took his pension as a color sergeant, and on the day he came out I offered him the door of the night house. He took it. He has stood it ever since, and he is the reason the thing works, because I can raise money and I can talk and I can put my name on a letterhead, but I cannot do the one thing that place is actually for, which is to be there at 3 in the morning when there is no earthly reason to be. Nessa runs the kitchen. Wren is a ward sister now, at the big hospital on the hill, and she comes on her nights off and sits with people, and does not tell them what she thinks. The brass disc hangs on a nail by the door where anybody can take it down and turn it over and read it, and about once a month somebody asks me what it means, and I tell them, and it takes a while. My brother came to the night house once, without warning, at 2 in the morning in an ordinary coat, and sat by the fire for an hour with a mug of tea and did not say very much. And when he left he stopped at the door and looked at Cael for a long moment and said, "Sergeant," and Cael said, "Sir." And that was the whole of it, and my brother went out into the street, and I have never been prouder of him in my life. People still ask me about the question. It is the only thing anybody wants. They want me to say it was a great confrontation, a prince and a soldier, honor against arrogance, and they want the reply for their walls. Here is what I tell them. I asked a man on 11 crowns and for a week whether he was loyal to the crown, the man, or the money. And I asked it because I had built my entire life on the certainty that the answer was the money, and that everybody knew it, and only I was honest enough to say so out loud. And he told me that he was loyal to whoever was alone in the room. He was standing in the rain when he said it. He was suspended, unpaid, publicly disgraced, and barred from the only funeral he had ever wanted to attend. And he had walked 2 miles at 2:30 in the morning to stand a watch that no one had ordered him to stand, over a woman who could not thank him, on behalf of a family that had thrown him away, at the request of a prince who had spat on him in front of 300 people. There is no answer to that. I have looked for one for a long time now. I am 71 years old. I still cannot sleep. It turns out you inherit that, along with the arguing, and most nights I come down the stairs at about 2:30 and put the kettle on, and Cael is at the door with his hands behind his back and his boots polished for no one, and we do not say very much because he never did. Somebody has to be awake at 3. It is a smaller thing than I was raised to want, and it is the only true thing I have ever been given, and it was given to me by a man I tried to buy. Ask me who I am loyal to.